Day by day, little by little, we write the story of our lives. Join author Joe Alch on a walk down memory lane with tenacious humans who didn't let their circumstances dictate their life and what they could become. Welcome to the Lemon Tree Memoirs of Courage podcast.
Welcome to the Lemon Tree. Today we have a special guest. It is National Kindness Day. And what better way to celebrate National Kindness Day than to have my friend Barbara Glass here to talk about writing a book. What do you do? Where do you start? Barbara has authored the Right Around the Corner column for more than 10 years, featuring book reviews, interviews, and slices of life, besides writing blogs and content for businesses. She is a bona fide card-carrying English major who reads and writes for the fun of it. And welcome, Barbara Glass.
Thank you, Joe.
Glad
to be here.
So glad to have you here. We're talking about, with my book, I have gotten a lot of feedback, great feedback, in fact, and the most of the feedback is, how did you do it? How did you start? How did you know what to write? So I want to talk about that today. We're already near the holidays where people are going to be thinking about their New Year's resolutions. That's only 6 weeks away. So what better way than to spend the new year writing your story? So let's talk about, I want to share a quote that I found today that I thought was so interesting. We tend to underestimate the amount of time it will take to write a book, while overestimating how much time we can devote in the process. So let's talk about writing your story. Where do you start, Barbara?
There's lots of ways to start. Start at Christmas and write about the Christmases that you remember. Start with your New Year's resolutions, how those have changed over time. I think that the best way to start writing about yourself is to write about yourself, and to do it in pieces which will help you stitch it together in time. And the most important thing, though, when approaching writing a memoir in particular, is to think about why you want to do this. It's the why. Are you writing it for your grandchildren as a gift? Are you writing it for yourself as an exploration of decisions you've made? Are you writing it for publication to be a book on Oprah and want to make it sensational? I mean, why are you doing it? And so in the name of National Kindness Day, The Lemon Tree was a very kind book. It had some difficult things to talk about, but it was a very kind book, and it reflects its author.
Well, and for me, my writing, it was really a journey for me. And I almost feel that person in the book wasn't me. It's so hard to explain. Now that I've gotten through, I feel like that when anybody goes through something difficult, it's getting to the other side that's so fantastic, and being able to share, what? Yeah, it was hard. There is strength in the struggle, though. And I've learned so much from that little Joe. And now I'm all grown up Joe. And it's just a different chapter in my life. So, but, one thing, not everybody has a sad childhood or a really sad event. And so what if they want to write on something funny or something history, or, do they have to write a memoir about something tragic?
No. In fact, if you are writing a memoir, and this is what The Lemon Tree is, then there are going to be episodes where you're going to have difficulty writing about them because you maybe haven't worked through the experience completely. Or there are permissions you need to get. There may be other people involved in the struggle that are you need to talk to. You need to interview them, if you will. You need to get their perspective because it's going to make the description that much richer. I promise you, you have a family of 6 children, you're going to have 6 different viewpoints on whatever happened. So that makes how you feel. It might change how you feel, it might not, but at least it rounds the description out to where the reader can understand what was going on at the time. So I think it's important to write about those episodes separately. You know, don't believe that you have to start at a certain point and end at a certain point, because your opinion on that may change. It may, we were talking about certain memoirs that are historical in nature. Sometimes they start in the middle. Sometimes they don't start, well, I was a small child in Louisiana. No. Sometimes they start, this is, you know, I'm entering school or I'm starting a new job and this is where it led. And then you do things in flashback. I would suggest if you want to write a historical book, find what really interests you. The why is the most important thing. Why are you doing this? Because that is the only thing that's going to propel you to finish it. Because some of it is a slog, isn't it? I mean, when you wrote your book, there were parts of it that you wanted to kind of get to the good part. Well, you have to put in the connective tissue in order that they understand where you are at a certain point. So writing a book is time consuming. You need to find your best time of the day when you're the most clear-headed. What are the circumstances? Do you have to have the radio in the background, or do you have to have a cup of coffee in your hand? Do you write better in your pajamas, or do you like to work late at night? Some people, I have some friends that do their best work at 1 and 2 o'clock in the morning. But it's like exercise. It's a discipline.
It is.
It's a discipline similar to starting a new diet or an exercise plan. Find what you like. That's why you're doing it. That's why you're setting time aside to do it, and do it according to what's going to help you get there.
Well, and I was a librarian at one of the high schools who wrote a couple of books, children's books. And she gave me advice to just write whatever was on my brain for 3 minutes. Just write, like, oh, I need to go to the grocery, or, oh, I've got to get to the bank, or I'm going to be late for work if I don't, or let's stop at the dry cleaning. So whatever I was thinking, just that filler, just to get that off my brain so that it could be clear and fresh for writing. And another tidbit I had, kind of like you're talking about writing about Christmas and maybe some Christmases in the past, just do 1,500 words.
Yes.
And make it doesn't have to be, 45 pages, but just a story, 1,500 words, and then you might be able to expand on that. Go back. And one thing I know, when I would write a chapter, and then I'd read it and review it, you can tweak it to death. You can tweak it. But it's a slow process. It takes a long time. And
well, I have a friend who's an artist, and it's similar to doing a painting. You can go back to it and go back to it and tweak it, and at some point you have to say, I'm done. It's done. And you have to walk away from it. And what I do with writing pieces is I let them marinate. Okay, leave it aside. Let me go to a different section of the book, and then I'll come back to this.
And I did the same, like parts that were really sad for me, and I share in my book, my mother attempted suicide. That particular part of the book, my brother and sister could not read it. It was so traumatic to us, or for us, and I bet those 4 chapters took me 6 months to write. Yes. It was so hard. And another thing, I know we do research. Like I wrote about the late 60s in New Orleans. I wrote about the early 70s. And I had to do research. One thing I did that helped me, I would go to antique fairs and I would go to estate sales and I would see little things that would remind me, oh, wait, one just off the top of my head, my aunt used to sell Avon. And do you remember in the late 60s, early 70s, they had some of the coolest decanters.
Oh, the Avon bottles.
Oh,
I know
they
people,
were
they
fabulous.
collected them like people collect shot glasses and souvenir spoons.
I know.
Yeah.
And so that is what helped me.
Mm-hmm.
So other than going to estate sales, how would you tell a writer, say they want to write about, I'm going to go back to their childhood Christmas from their earliest memories. So what would you recommend them do to prepare for that?
Do you have an album? Do you have photographs of your siblings? And you remember that plaid sofa? And I remember hearing stories about my father drinking bourbon on Christmas Eve because that's the only way he could get through the assembly instructions on the radio flyer or whatever. And the next morning, the milk and cookies were always gone. Santa came. And I think for research purposes, an album is a good place to start. I think Google it, Google the years. I think interesting when you're writing about the past, you do have to do a considerable amount of research. I was working on one memoir that was from World War II France, from the underground. And so I did a lot of research on that time, because I didn't experience it myself. So you have to find books on it. You can Google people who were alive at the time and figure out what the political situation is. It makes the context, if it's personal or if it's somebody else, the research and the context make it enriches the story
It
greatly.
does.
I was thinking about that this morning, and I thought, okay, when I was a kid, what was it like going to the bank? What were the grocery stores like? Oh, you remember bread was 10 cents a loaf?
Yes.
Yeah, and riding in the cart, and we played outside all the time. Like I noticed that in your book. Yeah, go on outside and play. That was what we did. There weren't many fences. There were dogs everywhere. You just played. You made fun. You made your own fun with a baseball game in the lot next to your house. And the carnival came to town, and it was in a vacant lot that was down by the post road. And it was my first experience with the Midway, that they call it here at the Texas State Fair. And it just, doing that reminds you, and you dig a little deeper and a little deeper. And then you have to cull to make it rich and to make it so that it communicates what you want to do to get to the next place.
Yeah, and put yourself back in that time that you want to write about. I know I was thinking when you mentioned the groceries, the S&H green stamps.
Oh,
I would just, and my mother would never, that was mess.
that
and
was my
trash.
job. That was my job.
but-
I had to, she had little strips of stamps, and I was the one that had to put them in the book. And we got a croquet set out of it, and a set of TV tables, and just stuff. It was fun.
I know, it was fun. I remember I went to an estate sale and somebody was selling them for like 10 cents a piece. This was a couple years ago.
Oh,
and I
Lord.
bought them. I'm like, and my husband's like, what are you going to do with those things? They're just neat. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know what I'll do with them.
Well, I remember when I inherited a sewing machine from my husband's grandmother, okay? And in the bottom of it were war stamps. Now, you talk about going back another generation. These were sugar, and they were war stamps. And I said, I must save these, and I passed them along. But it was a treasure to find. Yeah.
So and I know people can contact you at Right Around the Corner, but what are some resources if somebody doesn't have the financial means to work with a one-on-one coach and memoir coach and someone like you with your esteem and what would you recommend people do? Just the average that wants to do something and write a book doesn't have a lot of money.
All right. You can go to the library and use those computers if you don't have one. They have lots of resource books, and those librarians know where every fleck of dust is in that library. They can help you find reference books that are going to help you. Secondly, you can go to Staples or Office Depot and buy a tablet book. I mean, a cheap,
like a journal.
It doesn't have to be a moleskin journal for 10 or 15 bucks at Barnes and Noble. It can be just a spiral bound notebook, and write longhand. Longhand, how about that? And just start thinking about what you want to write about. But most important, you have to think about the why and who you're writing it for. Who are you writing it for? And then the rest of it will come as you write about your experiences. Find the time of day you want to do it. Get that cup of coffee. Make the atmosphere. It's just like getting your bedroom ready to go to sleep. You want the shades drawn, and you have the sound machine going, or whatever, the fan, whatever it is, helps bring you down to that point where you're going to be resting. Okay, you do the same thing with writing. What's going to set the stage for it? That's going to be comfortable for you. And make sure you have open-ended time if you can. I find that writing on deadline is I do it all the time. But to come home and have an hour to get something done is difficult. I'd rather work ahead when I have an open-ended afternoon and work on it then, rather than trying to do it in too short a period of time.
And that's
but
what
you can start in bits and pieces.
Right,
You can
and
start
that's,
that way.
I put one thing that helped me is it was $50. I went to the local community college and I joined a memoir writing class.
Right.
It was for people 50 and older, but they've got things, all churches have them. We've got one at our church right now that's free. But I would do those. There was a group of 6 of us. We'd write 2,000 words and then critique each other. Negative, never in a negative, oh, that was horrible, but in encourage, you know what? I couldn't see that character. I couldn't, you know what? I think you should expand on describing the movie theater.
Yeah.
Or so we worked together and encouraged each other. And so that's a great resource.
Yeah.
There are online classes.
Yes.
There's one out of New York City that is always doing classes, and I think it's $200 or so. But you get critiqued online by fellow writers.
Well, there's Ed2Go programs, but I find really that the classroom situations are better because you can actually have a conversation with somebody. I've never really liked the online classes because you're not really in the room with anybody. There's not a human connection. And I think writing is a very human thing to do. And so I recommend the Brookhaven College or Richland College or wherever you go. I recommend those classes as opposed to...
And they're so affordable.
Yes.
And you make friends. I mean, you're sharing your soul. And some of these stories in our class that I was in, and I continued for 2 years, every 6 weeks I'd sign up again and just made wonderful friendships with these people that had totally different stories than mine, but fascinating. And it was encouraging. I wanted them to succeed as well. So... let's talk about the top memoirs and why are memoirs so popular? What do you think the reason memoirs are so popular?
Because reality is far more interesting than fiction, to me. You can't make this stuff up. I mean, I read some memoirs and I said, who would have thought? Who would have invented this? And it's just far more interesting. There's usually more personal reminiscences, but texture, the characters. I just have enjoyed them so much, and they make a point. I mentioned Orange is the New Black earlier, that it talks about a particular experience, but then it's done in flashback. The childhood part and the relationships are done in flashback, but it's talking about a particular instance, a particular period of time. And I think that's it's so valuable. You couldn't make this up. And so somebody lived it. And that makes, I love biographies. I like autobiographies, which is a memoir. I like nonfiction better than fiction.
Me too.
Just because it really happened to somebody.
Well, and it is reality, and it's fascinating. And you think people are so drawn to the Inquirer and people to find out what's going on with what celebrity, you know. But even Sally Field's book, In Pieces, is fascinating. What she endured, and she is an incredible actress, but just to know her life story was very interesting. So
well, and how they got to now. You know, like reading The Lemon Tree was interesting. It's how I can definitely see you in this, and so it's it just gives a kind of an aura around somebody that, gee, I never knew that. Wow, that's really interesting. I enjoy it.
Thank you. Well, and for me too, one thing someone recommended to me when I was writing to read memoirs, because I was writing about my childhood. So read memoirs of other people writing about their childhood. And so for me, there was a book, Blackbird, was so good. Glass Castle, you know, that is like the number one memoir, still number one.
Well, Educated is one that's similar to that.
Educated is fabulous. And I have even reached out. I've met Jeanette Walls with the Glass Castle. I reached out to the author of Educated, and she's emailed me back. So these are real people, you know. And I think one of the questions I asked Jeanette Walls was, how did your brother and sister react? And, you know, she's like, it took them a little time, because you're not only sharing your soul, you're sharing your family.
That's what I meant about permissions.
Right.
Sometimes you need permissions. Sometimes you have to change names. Sometimes you have to kind of fuzzy the background so that an individual in the story is not recognizable. Because in telling your story, you're telling their story, and it's like theft in a way. So you need to at least
be respectful.
Be respectful and say, I'm writing a memoir, and I wanted to let you know that. And if there's anything, I will probably share chapters with you in advance of publication, just because I want you to, you're a part of my life as much as anybody else, and I respect that. So you have to get permissions. You do.
And for me, my mother did not.
But it's not a reason not to do it.
No. Yeah. And for me, my mother did not have the mothering genes that most mothers have. Yes. And so if I had released this book when she was still alive, she would be devastated. There's no way I could have done it.
You couldn't have done it.
I couldn't have done it. And even my dad, the last 6 months of his life, he did read chapters. And I shared with him, and my dad lived a lifetime of regrets. And we were able to talk about some things. He knew I was going to be releasing my story, and we had good talks. So it is important.
He knew he was close to the end.
Yes, he knew he was
so
close
in
to
a
the
way, it was good for him. Because it was a way of giving him permission to forgive himself for the regrets, because we all have them. We all have a boatload of them, and it's easy for the minister to say, "Oh, you just put your regrets in a basket and float them down the river." Not that easy to do. Not that easy to do.
No, and you and I both work in the senior industry, and I have seen people in those final days of life, they want that closure.
Yes.
I know with my mother, she was not the perfect mother, but when she was in that dying process, those last 3 days, I did not leave her side. She would hold onto my hand so tight. She squeezed, and I know she was saying, Joe, I'm so sorry. If I could do things differently, I would, and I cling to that. Because she was a wonderful person. She just wasn't good at mothering. So
I know, and if we had this very conversation at another time, I know you would get very teary because you'd go right back to that moment. Those are key. Those are human. They're human.
So we were going to need to wrap it up. This has gone so fast, and it's so wonderful.
I know we could talk for hours
on
this.
We could talk forever, but
and have.
I know, and you're just so wonderful at what you do. So, just real quickly, how long should a book be? How many pages or words should a book be?
As long as it is. As long as it's necessary to tell your story. And that's why I think it's good to start with certain pieces, to write your 1,500 words, similar to what you were saying in class. The typical book club book is going to be between 300 and 400 pages. Typical. I think for the general reader, that's about as long as you're going to hold somebody's attention. Okay? I mean, people, you get... Ron Chernow doesn't know how to write a short biography. He doesn't know how. So you're slogging through 1,000 pages of fabulous page-turning biography, but oh my God, it's a doorstop.
Well, and I'm busy.
Typically 300 to 400 pages. But I think your story is as long as it needs to be. If it's 200 pages, if it's a novella, it's okay. It's okay. As long as you know the why, you know what you're doing, maybe 100 pages of poetry, and that tells your story. I don't know. Some people have different ways of doing it. They do it in little pieces, or they do it in a letter writing style.
Like, what was the book, The Color Purple?
Yes.
And that was a novel, but that was a wonderful, just letters every day to God. They were wonderful. That was a great book.
Well, and the Orange Peel, Guernsey Literary Society, that was entirely in letters. Now, it was fiction, but it was real. I mean, it really... The setting was very real, but it was all letters. Very hard to do. But that is a way you can do it. It just is as long as it needs to be.
Thank you so much, Barbara. And tell us, how can the listener get in touch with you? And if they have questions for you, what is a contact?
Well, the best way to contact me is I have a website, rightaroundthecorner.net. But it is not one where you can't leave comments on it. So I would, and I have a blog and so forth on there, but not a lot of my pieces. You can read my pieces in FYI 50 Plus and in Good Life Family, the senior voice, which is no longer there, but you might find it online. Or you can email me at glasstexas@outlook.com. And it's all spelled out, glasstexas@outlook.com. And I'll be happy to respond.
Thank you so much. And this has been great. I want to have you back again. And we'll continue on about that New Year's resolution and writing your book.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Barbara.
You're
Have
welcome.
A wonderful day of kindness today.
Every day is a good day to be kind.
It is. So thank you so much.
Thank
and have
you.
a wonderful day.
Enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on the Lemon Tree Memoirs of Courage podcast, hosted by author Joe Alch. You can find more information on Joe's beginnings and the Lemon Tree at thelemontreebook.com.